You join us this morning from the nearly flooded footpath which runs between Lower Bockhampton and Stinsford. Those two village names will have a lot of significance and resonance for you if you are a fan of the author and poet Thomas Hardy. This is a path which he would have been intimately familiar with, and it's a pleasure to walk in his footsteps. I am fascinated by Thomas Hardy. Not just the stories and the poems, but the man himself, his career, his life, and his beginnings. So it's about time we took a trip to Wessex, to the hills and valleys which inspired him most, and to see the church which he loved. We found ourselves at the top of one of Dorset's steepest hills, lashed by wind and rain, but with magnificent panoramic views across the Dorset countryside. We were watertight just in the nick of time. After that, the evening became much more relaxing. The next morning we set out for Bockhampton, near Dorchester. On the right you'll see a sign to Hardy's birthplace, the humble cottage where he was born and raised, and where he wrote two of his most famous novels, Under the Greenwood Tree and Far from the Madding Crowd. As we drive on towards Lower Bockhampton, it's hard to imagine that a great novelist would have roamed these country lanes as a child. Hardy is often seen in photos as the archetypal Victorian gentleman, an icon of wealth and literary success. But he was born the son of a builder, and his mother a cook for the local vicar. As a child, he would have crossed this bridge countless times on his way to church. He would have gazed over at the River Froom and the fields beyond. I became familiar with Hardy's works from reading Jude the Obscure, and I cried when I got to the end. Jude, who is aptly named after the patron saint of lost causes, embarks on his journey towards becoming a student at Oxford University, despite being a lowly stonemason. Many of Hardy's novels centre around the issues of social class. Hardy himself was very conscious of his humble beginnings, and even in his own autobiography, although it's called The Life of Thomas Hardy and credited to his second wife, he covers over the less appealing aspects of his own personal circumstances. Though Thomas Hardy always aspired to be a great writer, he worked for a number of years as an architect's assistant in Dorset, but also in London. This calls to mind a trip I made earlier this year to show my family one of the most harrowing legacies of Hardy's time there. We walked up St Pancras Road in Camden, a part of the city which has changed hugely since Hardy's time. But on the right you'll see old St Pancras Church. It was here in the winter of 1866 a young Thomas Hardy was sent on a grim assignment. The new Midland Railway was about to be extended into St Pancras Station, and somebody had to oversee the removal of hundreds of graves, coffins and memorials which stood in its way. The 26-year-old Thomas Hardy was given the gruesome job of supervising. Under the cover of darkness, coffins were exhumed and relocated, some of them falling open and spilling their contents of bones and skulls. But most remarkable of all is the fate of some of the headstones. As we approach the rear of the churchyard, with trains screeching in the background, we find a curious monument to both life and death, one of London's strangest and most secretive attractions. Dozens of gravestones were piled up, and here they've stayed ever since. At the centre is the trunk of an old ash tree, which fell in a storm last year. It's forever been known as the Hardy tree. A spectacle which is bound to leave visitors like me and my family speechless. Back in Stinsford, Billy was waiting patiently for me, and we continued our approach to Hardy's beloved church. Hardy had a very intimate connection with St Michael's Church throughout his entire life. It was almost a reference point for him, whatever was going on in his life. And even though his opinions on Christianity certainly wavered as he got older, he always described himself as a churchy person, and he could see very clearly the moral value of attending church. We turned right and followed the leafy track leading to our final destination. On both sides were sections of graveyard, but further up the hill, nestled between the trees, we find one of Dorset's most cherished and historic buildings. And here we are at the gateway to the church which Thomas Hardy knew so intimately. He was born near here in Higher Bockhampton the 2nd of June 1840, and 33 days later baptised here at the ancient church of St Michael's. This approach shows off this beautiful 13th century church in all its glory. The angle of the roof was raised in 1870, much to Thomas Hardy's distaste. But with the flag flying proudly on the tower, this church and its surroundings are a perfect scene of Englishness. Without a doubt, one of the most beautifully kept churches I have had the pleasure to visit. I have been here before, Earlier this year, I played for Hardy's birthday service here at St. Michael's Church. And I'm so pleased that I can now share this church with all of you. The building has been immaculately decorated for harvest, and the church itself is splendid. The lights in this church only stay on for a few moments at a time, but with the building illuminated properly, you can see some of the most interesting musical features. In particular, this west gallery, which originally would have housed all of the musicians who accompanied the services here. Also the magnificent but very small church organ. Now, here in the chancel, there is another church organ. This is a now redundant instrument which was given to the church in 1931 by Thomas Hardy's sister, Kate, in memory of her parents, her sister Mary, and her two brothers, all of whose burials she attended in this churchyard. The only part of this organ that remains is the front panel. I think part of the issue with an instrument like this is because it's in the chancel and it speaks directly opposite, the sound wouldn't project very well into the church. I'm only using intuition here, but that's the reason why I suspect it was replaced. At the time this organ was installed, the old west gallery which Thomas Hardy describes in Under the Greenwood Tree had been removed. In fact, he and his siblings had a memorial plaque fixed to the wall of the tower arch to commemorate it. This new gallery was only built in the 1990s, but it allows us to imagine the band of string players who accompanied services before organs became fashionable. One of them was Thomas Hardy's own father, Thomas II, who caught sight of his future bride in this very church. The moment is recalled so lovingly by Hardy in one of his most famous poems. I read it last year at Rockbourne. She turned in the high pew until her sight swept the west gallery and caught its row of music men with viol, book and bow against the sinking, sad tower window light. She turned again, and in her pride's despite, one strenuous viol's inspirer seemed to throw a message from his string to her below, which said, "I claim thee as my own forthright." Thus their hearts' bond began, in due time signed, and long years thence, when age had scared romance. At some old attitude of his or glance, that gallery scene would break upon her mind, with him as minstrel, ardent, young and trim, bowing New Sabbath or Mount Ephraim. Welcome, friends, to the West Gallery of St. Michael's. It's hard to imagine a large group of musicians in here. But now this gallery only houses the church organ, which is an instrument built by Brian Daniels. And if you are an astute follower of my channel, you will know Brian Daniels' name because he built the organ at Alverdiston Church. But this instrument is very much different. This is really a chamber organ in style. By that I mean it just has one keyboard and no pedals. Chamber organs are traditionally used to accompany a group of musicians, particularly in Baroque music. And that's the kind of music that this is suited to. It only has 4 stops and no swell pedal, so it's much more appropriate for Baroque music where you don't have gradual crescendos and diminuendos. It occupies this commanding position high up in the church, I might inappropriately use the expression space age to describe how it looks up here. Looking to the right and left of the main pillar of pipes, you can see all the way to the altar. Many organs are tucked away in corners, or the organist is facing the wrong way, so it's much harder to see what's going on during the service. So this is quite unique in that respect. It's also a very attractive looking instrument. It's built to be beautifully symmetrical, and I love the kind of patina on the pipes. A brief demonstration of the stops will show you everything you need to know about the sound of this instrument. Firstly, we have a flute stop, and then a principal which bolsters the chorus. Add to that a flute, half the length, so half the pitch. And finally, a very, very spiky mixture sound. So those of you who are organists will recognise that sound as being perfect for Baroque music. Voluntary in G by the Old English composer John Stanley. Stanley was left nearly blind after an accident at the age of 2, but he went on to achieve huge musical success. He had a very impressive memory and was able to conduct performances of Handel oratorios. Though the organ here at St Michael's has just one keyboard, you can create some fun effects by changing the stops mid-playing. Just watch my left hand in this snippet of another Stanley voluntary. and so on. The effect is achieved by pushing in and pulling out the principal stop to sound like an echo. Meanwhile, Billy was downstairs reading and exploring the memorials, but he also had a handy function listening out for some very strange notes on the organ. What does that sound like from down there? What isn't that?
Yeah.
Which one's the worst? Huh? This one?
Yeah.
What's this one sound like?
That's fine.
Okay, alright, thanks. One of the pipes was causing the wooden case to vibrate, so best to avoid that one. But once we'd got that sorted, I could play one of my favourite hymns for the season, Come, Ye Thankful People Come, at a sprightly village tempo. Henry Alford's Festival Hymn, with music by George Elvey. Over the last 100 years, Thomas Hardy's work has been appreciated by many millions of people from all over the world. But only a few are able to visit his country in person, and to see the church for themselves. Through YouTube, I'm trying to share these ancient buildings with as many people as I can, but I couldn't do it without your help. I organise and pay for these trips entirely on my own, and the task of editing them together takes a good few days. If you'd like to support me, head to my PayPal page underneath this video, which is an excellent way of making a contribution wherever you are in the world. You can also visit my website benmaytonmusic.co.uk, and there you'll find the address to send a cheque. Thank you so much for helping me to continue to make these films. In his long life of 88 years, Thomas Hardy had seen so many changes in the world, both in its natural landscape and the ease of transport, but also in politics and society. As he put it so bluntly in the poem Christmas 1924, "Peace upon earth was said, we sing it, and pay 1,000,000 priests to bring it. After 2,000 years of mass, we've got as far as poison gas." Hardy had always expressly wished to be buried at his beloved Stinsford, with his parents and grandparents beside him. But the reality was rather different. When he died in 1928, plans were put in place controversially for cremation and a grand service at Westminster Abbey. Only Hardy's heart was spared from the ashes, cut out and unceremoniously placed in a biscuit tin until it could be transferred to a coffin. The service at Westminster Abbey went ahead, with Hardy's ashes interred there in Poets' Corner. Meanwhile, a more private ceremony took place at St. Michael's, Stinsford, and so only his heart lies here, at the northern end of a churchyard which inspired so many of his poems, and overlooking the pretty church of his youth. A melancholy end to this week's tale. But, as I was reading through the eyewitness accounts of the Westminster Abbey service, there was one which cheered me up. And this is from a letter written by Charlotte Shaw to T.E. Lawrence. Then a wonderful thing came. On that glorious organ, an almost divine organist played the Dead March from Saul. I say advisedly that it was one of the most splendid things of all my life. He began very low and soft, and gradually opened out, making one's whole being thrill to each great phrase, up to the most marvellous burst of great chords, confident, triumphant, and assertive. It takes Handel to say the last word. Well, with those words echoing, I wanted to finish in a more gentle and subdued way at St. Michael's Church in Stinsford, the church which so inspired Thomas Hardy and which he loved. Thank you so much, as ever, for watching.